Thank you very much for the presentation.
Any questions, comments? Councillor Varga?
Thanks, Merrick. I guess one of the frustrations that I'm having is trying to get immunized now that I'm in that factor of where I can get immunized, but yet making the phone calls and doing it online. No answers have come back to it, guys. So how are we doing in that? Have we got enough that are coming into Medicine Hat, doses of the product that's available, or is it just a slow process and I got to have patience?
Just through the chair, that's a difficult question. As it relates to the doses that are provided to each municipality or local authority, it's based on population density. So obviously Calgary is going to get far more than Medicine Hat. I do know that given the fact that pharmacies were brought on at a later date, when you compare it to Alberta Health Services immunization clinics, there's probably some kinks to work out. There's also numerous methods in which you can book for pharmacies. You can do it online, you can call the local pharmacy. So there's other options that the public should try when booking through a pharmacy and not just sticking to, let's say, like the online booking. There are other ways to book at a pharmacy. So part of it is patience. Part of it is just working out the kinks as it relates to the pharmacy distribution.
Councillor Dumanowski?
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Merrick, for the update. Nice new uniform, I noticed. Fits the job. And in seriousness, obviously you're retelling the story. We're doing our part to retell the story. Vaccinations. 21% is moving us in the right direction. My interest and then my comment is that I watch a lot of news, maybe more than I should sometimes, although I like to be informed. And I know the modeling even many months ago indicated, even during the Spanish flu, that the third wave was the biggest wave, and the models are proving 100 plus years later we're doing the same thing. So, but there is light at the end of the tunnel, and certainly we are moving there. So our ability to work together to do that is important. I guess my question is, do you have any feedback on the implementation of these rapid tests and how they're being used as indicators, or how they're able to use those rapid tests to create extrapolations that help them make decisions and pivot a lot quicker than maybe the last two times that we've gone through these increases? And then maybe coupled with that, are there any, I don't want to say artificial or trajectories that we are looking at as far as thresholds that will start to impact our community services, not necessarily by virtue of the province telling us what to do, but what we can handle? And you indicated some of the absenteeism or sick numbers that are obviously going to complicate things, and those can change rapidly as well. So, because the last thing you also want to do is close anything down unnecessarily, and I'm not saying that we should do that. I'm saying the other flip side of that is that we have to do it without any notice or adequate notice, which probably is par for the course. So going back, rapid testing, you have any idea how that's impacting anything in the province? Because I haven't heard much. And then have we set any thresholds for ourselves as a organization, as a municipality, as a government body, where we can quickly pivot so that we're ready to respond?
Excellent questions. Through the chair, unfortunately, I can't answer the first question given the rapid testing. I don't have a lot of information as to how the province is actually making the decisions based on that. It's a fairly new process, and I do know that organizations and businesses can apply online to be able to actually use the rapid test kits for their own employees. There's obviously criteria associated around it. And unfortunately, I can't answer the question on that one, Councillor Dumanowski. For the second one, definitely, and that's, I can expand on that one quite a bit. And I want to maybe preface that the statement here is, we did this work throughout a number of years, and we are well ahead with anything that could happen. And what I mean by that is we put some fairly heavy in-depth planning in a few years back to ensure that our essential services remain. So whether that be just reallocation of staff that may be trained to be able to do that job, or retraining people to do that job. And so we have redundancy upon redundancy upon redundancy for our essential services. So even though we may set, say, a loss threshold of 50% staff where we actually can't operate, that's not necessarily accurate, because we can supplement that with additional staff that may be trained or can be trained. And it depends on operation as well, depending on what that essential service is, whether it be fire or police or our utility departments such as generation or utility distribution, things like that. So we went on a fairly hefty planning process there to be able to identify not only city staff, but be able to have all those additional contingency plans in place. And so it does vary between department, but we're well prepared to be able to respond to anything that comes upon us.
Councillor Friesen?
Well, thank you, Merrick, for your report. And yes, I must comment on your uniform as well, quite very striking. I wanted to just to hear your comments briefly about saturation and communication. So we've probably all noticed that as time goes by, people, they become saturated with restrictions, with having to be so cautious. They're taking a few more risks and so on. It's the nature of human beings. And yet, we're in the third wave where we don't really want to let our guard down. So just wanted to know if you had any comments about that, and then how are we targeting our communication efforts in the same way or a different way to keep encouraging people?
Excellent question. So through the chair, so as it relates to our communication efforts, so from the onset of the pandemic, and actually any event that involves a partnership between another kind of partnering agency, whether it be Alberta Health Services or any other agency for that matter, it really is the dependent or the identification as to what lane we stay in as it relates to a response. So who ultimately owns one piece or other pieces. And communications is a really important one as it relates to the pandemic, because ultimately we're not doctors. We're not epidemiologists. We're not healthcare professionals. We're emergency managers and city officials for that matter. And so we very much rely on Alberta Health Services to give us that information or provide the information, and then we will subsequently relay that information. So how this has definitely changed throughout the course of the pandemic is obviously as to what stage of the pandemic we're in. And I'll use the example of now is we're definitely in mitigation, which is actually immunity. Which we will take every effort that we can, and we have, with relaying that information and how important it is. And so just as it relates to communication efforts, and me standing right here is no different, just relaying information on behalf of the local authority to our community members as to what's important and how we actually get through this process. Saturation of information is definitely there. As it relates to what is important with information, I always direct people to Alberta Health Services as the source of truth, because ultimately they're leading us through this. We're supporting them through it. I know there's a lot of information out there, and I just caution people to be careful as to what information you're actually looking at.
Any other questions, comments? Could I get a motion for reception?
So moved.
We could vote. That was unanimous. Thank you, Merrick.
Moving along now to reports. Item 5.1 is our Energy and Infrastructure Committee meeting of April the 8th. Just for information.
So moved.
Second?
We could vote. That was unanimous. Thank you.
Item 5.2 is the Audit Committee meeting of April 12th for adoption and information, with adoption for the reappointment of KPMG as our external auditors for 2021.
Move for adoption and information.
Second. Comments? Questions? Counselor Friesen?
Well, I read this with interest. I think it reflects as healthy a picture as we can have at this point in time. On that, I wanted to ask through the chair, probably to the city manager, but perhaps someone else. I wanted to ask about our operating expenses as they would normally be and as they are with COVID. Even though COVID presents quite a financial drain on any system or bureaucracy, or household for that matter, it also provides an opportunity to save money in other areas. I just wonder if you could comment on that overall in the budget. Has that caused, are we really, has COVID been a huge expense, or has it been offset to a large degree by savings in other areas?
Mr. Chairman, I'll defer that to Managing Director Eggert, but just to put it in context, you will recall that 2021 has been a particularly challenging year in any event. So the budget that was approved by Council in the fall of 2020 looked at a target of almost $15 million a year in sustainable net cost savings in the local government side of the enterprise. So dealing with COVID in the midst of trying to make that kind of fundamental cost structure change has been particularly challenging. I am very pleased to report that the management team has risen to the challenge and is firing on all cylinders to make sure that that does get achieved. But with regard to the specifics related to COVID and the particular challenges that they provide, Managing Director Eggert and perhaps even Managing Director Mastel would have some commentary on that.
Thank you, and through the chair, we have been watching and mitigating the impacts of COVID since the beginning, since March of 2020. When we look at our net financial impact on the municipality, it's $1.6 million for the year for 2020, but that only tells half the story. The story is that the rest of the story is that we were actually mitigating many of those additional expenses throughout the year, whether it was through maintaining vacancies with employees or looking at other areas to reduce the cost of the operations. I will say that throughout the year, some of the things that have impacted us is facility closures. And of course, these are all subject to Alberta Public Health directives. And it's not only closures, but where they are open, we have reduced capacity. And so that has impacted us as well. The reduced flight activity at the airport has been significant. And we have noted that on our reduced revenue line as well. We have reduced building permit activity. And during 2020, we had slower construction occurring due to uncertainty around the economy, and that's impacted us. And then also just the cost related to mitigating increased cleaning around all our facilities, that's both on the labor side and on the supply side, would have created some additional expenses for us. When I look at all that, and I mentioned facility closures at the top of the list, for those facilities that did close, any programs, services, staff related to delivering those programs would have been reduced to accommodate for the closure. So I hope that answers the question. When I look forward into 2021, we think a lot of this will continue, and which includes the various steps by the province in terms of facilities and what we can and can't do in terms of operations. So back to you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councillor Turnbull?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a further follow-up on that, Councillor Friesen. Yes, obviously expenses went down in different areas, but so did revenues. No revenues at the FLC, or the swimming pools. Plus, with COVID, even when they were open, not just having safety issues at the pools, you also had to have 2 people hired to keep the social distancing apart. And you know, it's interesting to note that, yes, when those buildings were totally closed, they weren't using electricity, and so the revenue for Genco went down substantially. But unfortunately, you can't cut off the operations of departments like Genco simply because they have to be there to keep the power flowing when and if it's needed.
Any other questions, comments on this report? All right, seeing none, if we could vote. That was unanimous, thank you.
Item 5.3, Public Services Committee meeting, again, just for information.
I'll move the report for information.
I'll second that.
If we could vote. That was unanimous, thank you.
Item 5.4 is the Corporate Services Committee meeting, April 13th, for adoption with the rescission of transportation safety policies.
So moved.
Second.
Comments, questions? We'll say a housekeeping issue. All right, if we could vote. And that was unanimous, thank you.
Item 5.5 is the Administrative Committee meeting of April 15th for adoption and information with adoption of the new administrative organization bylaw.
I will move adoption and information as indicated.
Second.
Any comments? All right, if we could vote. And that was unanimous, thank you.
Reports for reception next. Item 6.1, Municipal Planning Commission meeting of March the 24th.
I move this report for reception.
Second.
Comments? If we could vote. And that was unanimous, thank you.
New bylaws. Item 7.1 is bylaw 4662. Bylaw of the City of Medicine Hat to establish the organizational structure of the city's administrative team. Just before first reading, I will note that page 7 of the bylaw is a typo. Under the table should be section 456 for the Assessment Review Board clerk rather than 457. Thank you.
Your Worship, I leave to introduce bylaw number 4662 and wish it read a first time as amended.
I'll second that.
If we could vote. And that was unanimous, thank you. We can go for all 3 readings on this one tonight.
Your Worship, I beg leave to introduce bylaw number 4662, wish it read a second time
Second.
as amended, sorry.
Comments? Okay, if we could vote. That was unanimous, thank you.
Your Worship, I wish
Unanimous
unanimous
consent.
consent of council in order to introduce bylaw number 4662 to introduce third reading tonight.
If we could vote.
Seconder.
Oh, sorry, Dave.
Second.
Sorry.
Sorry.
And do you have consent to move to third reading?
Your Worship, I wish to move bylaw number 4662 and wish it read a third time and passed.
And I'll second that.
Any questions, comments on third reading? Okay. Oh, Councillor Turnbull?
Thank you, Worship. Well, I am very happy about this, this bylaw. It is a major change in how our city has structured its management team. And so that's part of why we have a $14.8 million reduction in cost to operate our city services. And it also is putting into motion not just Invest Medicine Hat, but also strategic plans on how we're going to fill the gap of revenue shortage, because we can't simply get by for the $25 million gap that we've got 15 by simply cutting all services to the point where we can't provide the citizens with the same good services we have. So I think it's an interesting, that this structure is not just semantics. This is a well-balanced business, a case to ensure that our city is able to answer and meet the needs of our citizens, both through added revenues and, of course, continuing to look at reduction of services, cost to operate our city. Thank you.
Any other comments? Third reading? All right, if we could vote. And that was unanimous, thank you.
All right, our next item of business is the notice of motion. Councillor Friesen.
Your worship, members of council, just in terms of process, what I plan to do is read you my motion first, then I will have to move to waive the period for notice of motion, and then finally I'll just move the motion, which I will already have read, if I could. So just to speak very briefly to the context, as most everyone in our community is aware, there's been some concern about services for those who are struggling with homelessness, sometimes with many other variables that go along with that, and how we best serve those folks in our community, and do it in a way that honors business community and those folks with those particular needs, and in a way that honors everybody. And so this has been a subject talked about greatly in the community, with a lot of interest expressed. And so I and hopefully most of my colleagues here have given it a lot of thought, done a lot of talking with others in the community, and that's the basis on which I make this motion. So based on the premise, here, let me do it this way. Based on the premise that the city has a role to play as a partner, not the sole owner, along with larger community partnership, including a primary role for our provincial government, I make the following motion. I move that the city manager, along with our internal social collective committee, examine the possibility of facilitating and supporting the coordination of a community-driven collaborative that considers opportunities related to a long-term permanent strategy and shelter facility. Now, having said that, I have to make a motion to waive the period for notice of motion. If someone would second it.
I'll second that. If we could vote on waiving the notice of motion. You have unanimous consent.
All right, your worship, then, if I could, and I already read it, so I would like to move adoption of that motion.
I'll second that.
Councillor Turner. Any questions, comments on the motion on the floor? Councillor Salmarsh.
Thank you, Mayor Cluxton. There are parts of this wording that I don't necessarily agree with, but to kind of nitpick at this point, I think, is to miss the important point here that council is signaling, in that we're acknowledging that we have issues around social disorder in some areas of our city, and around some facilities that kind of needs to be addressed here. So I think it is an important first step that council is acknowledging this, and that we're going to take steps to look for solutions. So I will support this.
Thank you, Councillor Salmarsh. Any other questions or comments? All right, if we can vote on the motion on the floor. And that passes unanimous. Thank you.
Moving on now to new business. 9.1 is the 2020 City of Medicine Hat financial statements for adoption.
So moved.
Second.
Any questions or comments? Okay, if we could vote. That was unanimous. Thank you.
Item 9.2 is appointment of a temporary licence inspector. Councillor Dumanowski will speak to this.
Your Worship, that Taylor Vora is hereby appointed as a temporary license inspector under the city's applicable bylaws, effective April 19, 2021.
Second.
Okay. Any comments? If we could vote? And that was unanimous. Thank you. Seeing no more business before this council, we're adjourned.
Participant exiting. Rochelle Pancoast,